I would definitely say that I'm a mystic. This personality, this person that I have become in the world, which is kind of this, it's a construction of so many different ideas and memories and experiences, and we develop this sense of self. But if we strip all of that away, what are we? It's really easy to go out into the weeds of things when you're talking about mysticism. You can really get far out there in things that just have no rational basis in reality. Almost like you take a prism and you shine white light through it and you get a million different colors out the other side. Those million different colors are kind of all the different religious traditions that we have. They're all interpretations or translations of that original mystical insight of oneness. And I see Mormonism in that light, that it is one of these expressions of the ultimate reality. If you dig deeper behind, what is consciousness, it seems like it does cross over into some kind of energy. That we're not actually something separate from it. We are it that is manifesting itself today in the here and now. But when we start digging down deeper through spiritual practices like meditation or other means, we can almost penetrate through that intellect, that duality of intellect, to something deeper that does seem to show our oneness with all of reality.
Welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 611, Mormon Mysticism with Bryce Haymond, part 1. Why part 1? I don't know. I mean, Bryce and I, we're going to have more conversations like the one that you're going to hear today. And if you're interested in that, and if there's questions that you have, really, I tell you what, I'd just like you to send me an email. Send me an email to infantsonthrones@gmail.com and tell me what you think about this stuff. Tell me what you think about Mormon mysticism and this whole way of looking at the world. What do you think about what you're listening to? I want to know. I really want to know. And I've had listeners send me videos of this guy who looks at past life narratives, like from kids, and he studies them, and it's like an actual legitimate thing, apparently. I don't know. I'm going to do an episode on that upcoming soon, so thank you who sent that to me. I've had other people send me so many things in recent weeks. It's almost overwhelming, but I love it, and I want you to be one of them. I want you to be somebody who reaches out to me and sends me something too. So anyway, you're going to listen to myself and Bryce have a conversation about mysticism. Bryce has really dedicated himself to this topic. He is really... You're gonna hear it. He's written blogs. He's got a lot of material. Really well versed in this. So I hope you enjoy the conversation today, and we'll just get right to it. Thanks. So Bryce, thank you for coming on. So I want to explain, and we talked a little bit the other day. I got to know you. We talked for maybe 45 minutes. But one of my listeners. Sent me a link to your blog and said, Glenn, it sounds like you're interested in mysticism and Mormonism, and there's this guy who's written so much stuff. And he's very approachable. He's very interesting, and you should go check out Bryce Haymond. And so I did, and you were very approachable and personable. You've got this thing called a friendship room. So I made an appointment, and we sat down and chatted in the friendship room. So I want to introduce you to the listeners of Infants on Thrones, and give you a chance to share who you are and what you do, and hopefully have some interesting conversations about what mysticism is and how it relates to Mormonism, and especially how that's impacted you and changed your life. So
sounds good.
Take it away, Bryce. Who are you?
Well, I am I was born a Mormon here in Utah. To a very conservative Mormon family. Grew up in Sandy. Did all the pretty typical Mormon things growing up. There wasn't anything unique really about my childhood. I did all the pretty typical Mormon things. Did scouting and
Yeah.
deacon, and I went to church every Sunday, and everything was pretty typical on that front. Um, and I served a mission. Went to
Now we talked the other day about Nibley.
yeah.
Like, were you interested in Hugh Nibley and that kind of like more esoteric Mormonism even as you were growing up?
I didn't really get into that until a little bit uh, later.
Okay. All right.
I had been, a little interested in Nibley. I've always been a deep thinker,
Mm-hmm.
trying to really get to the bottom of things. But I didn't really get into like Nibley until a little bit later teenage years, I would say, is when I started reading like his material,
Yeah.
and started thinking about these things in a deeper way.
But like pre-mission, kind of mid-teens, late teens.
Yeah, yeah, like
Because I was like that too, and the reason I asked is because you said it was pretty typical, Mormon upbringing. But I don't know how many kids, even as teenagers, get really interested in like Hugh Nibley and
yeah,
the kinds of things. But I did because my dad was,
yeah,
and so he would pull me aside and he shared with me this thing. We didn't talk about this the other day, but it was called the Watchers.
uh-huh.
Have you heard, are you familiar with
That
the
sounds
Watchers and what?
familiar.
I try to reconstruct it, but it was basically because not only did he like Nibley, but he liked pseudepigrapha.
Uh-huh.
And so there was a story, I think, from the apocryphal book of Enoch, where there were these angels that were placed to like rule over the four seasons or the four corners of the earth or something like that, and they were called the Watchers.
Hmm.
And that they saw the offspring of Adam and Eve, the daughters of men, and they lusted after them. And so
Hmm.
these Watchers actually fell.
Yeah.
They didn't keep their first estate or whatever it was at that point, and they coinhabited with the daughters of men, and their offspring created the giants.
Mm.
Which you see threads of this. I'll call it folklore now, but
Yeah.
you see threads of this story even in the Bible text. Why Noah's there was so much wickedness on the earth that the flood had to come. Part of it was to destroy this race of giants that
Mm.
I think they were called the Nephilim.
Mm.
Um, but so there were like these things in there that my dad would pull out and go, hey, do you see there's these little pieces that are even in our scriptures, but there's more. It's like that article of faith that we believe everything that's been revealed and that there'll be a great many more things revealed. It was that great many more things that really drew my attention and appreciation and a lot of devotion. And I'm guessing that you were probably similar that way, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I've like I said, I've always wanted to think deeply about things and kind of get to their
Yeah.
source, and really try to understand kind of underpinnings of things, and where
Hmm.
they come from, and why do they develop as they do, and what's their source, and why do we do the things that we do, and all these kinds of questions. And so I started getting into that kind of thing in my later teenage years, and started thinking more deeply about these things. And then I went on a mission to El Salvador, Spanish speaking, and that's probably where I really started getting uh, really deep into these things, because that's all I could do really in my study was
Yeah.
study these things, and so I did a lot of reading and pondering and praying on them.
What were the topics that most captured your attention? Like what was it that you wanted to take deep? What was it that you wanted to really understand the
Yeah,
origins of?
it, I think from a pretty early stage, I was really interested in the temple. The,
Hmm.
the temple really piqued my interest. Um, of course, it didn't until I could go through it myself, which was probably when I was about 18 or so,
Yeah.
when I first went through the temple. And ever since then, I really wanted to try to understand, what is this thing? What is
Yeah.
this temple? Where did we get all of these rituals, and what does it mean?
Yeah.
What's the symbolism? What's it pointing to? Um,
So when you would go to the temple, you were fascinated with what was going on. You were paying attention to all of the little things and trying to figure out how they fit together. Like, did you do this? Because I did this with like the signs and tokens, where I'm like, oh, I noticed there's a progression where like the thing that you do with your right hand, and the next time you do that with your left hand, you do something new with your right hand, and then it, like, I started noticing these patterns and going, oh, okay, what does that mean? There's got to be something more that's going on here. Was that your experience?
yeah, exactly. That's the kind of things I was asking myself. Why do we do it this way? What are we
Yeah,
what are we doing with our hands, our arms? I mean, what is this about?
yeah,
And I think that's probably what initially led me to Nibley, because
hmm,
he had gone so deep in those temple related subjects. And so that's where I really was drawn to Nibley's work, because a lot of his work deals with temple subjects. Um, and so that's what drew me there. And of course, reading Nibley just drew me further into kind of the esoteric aspects of religion and spirituality and the history behind it, and how these threads have kind of weaved their way through history in so many different societies. And Nibley was really big in investigating even like the Hopi Indian tribe, and how the spirit moved through that people, and how it was similar in many ways to the Mormon temple. And so
yeah.
I got really
I'm really suspicious of everything that I hear from Nibley now. I got to tell you.
into
Like when I hear you say that he was studying the Hopi people, I think he was studying like a caricature of the Hopi people that was constructed by his understanding of the Book of Mormon. He was like trying to retrofit it
yeah.
into like, see, the Hopis prove that the gospel is true.
Yeah, and that's the way that I approached it at that time. Is I thought that all
Yeah,
of these things that Nibley was uncovering, all the parallels and the similarities in other cultures and other traditions, they were all proof that the
yeah,
church
right.
was true, right?
Yeah,
That the LDS church was in possession of the truth, because you see all of these parallels in other cultures. And
yeah,
of course, all of those are kind of apostate forms of the truth that is only in the LDS church.
yeah, right.
That's the way
Yeah.
that I approached it for a long time. And when I
It was exciting to look at it that way, as
yeah,
like, oh, that we've got this story that Mormonism is a restoration not only of Christ's church in the meridian of time, but like going all the way back to Adam and Eve.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
if Adam and Eve would have had home teaching and visiting teaching, they would have
yeah,
been doing it.
yeah,
And so like everything that we know as truth, if there's something that's even a little bit close to it out there, it seemed like it was a survival from this older relic that
yeah,
had just kind of
yeah,
decayed over time, and we had
exactly.
the truth. Yeah,
And that's exactly the way that Nibley portrayed it as well. Is
right.
these were all kind of apostate forms of the truth, the true revelation of God, that was now in the LDS church. They were all
Yeah.
evidence or proof that what the LDS church was doing was true, that it had a genuine uh, source. Um, and so,
Now your wife has gone through a folklore. She's got a master's degree in folklore, right? And she's working on her PhD right now.
that's right. Yeah,
Have you talked with her about monogenesis versus polygenesis, in the way that, just like the view of how these common traditions exist in the world, like they either came from one single source, monogenesis, or polygenesis? Have you talked with her about
we haven't
that at
talked
all?
about that specific thing, but we have done some comparisons. With my studying kind of the history of spirituality and religious traditions, and her studying folklore, there's a
Hmm.
lot of crossover there
Absolutely.
between
Yeah.
between those two uh, fields of study. So we've compared notes a little bit, and it is
Cool.
interesting where there is overlap in the direction of people telling their stories and kind of their deepest spiritual traditions, and how these become narratives that they live within. It
Yeah.
becomes a part of their society, and the way that their worldview becomes
Right.
wrapped around that narrative.
Yeah. And so just to this idea of monogenesis, that there's a single origin to everything, was so baked into my own worldview just by my experience as a Mormon, like being exposed to these kinds of things from Nibley. I mean, it's all over the place of,
Yeah.
like there was a single truth and everything is a derivative of that. I had never really even considered the possibility of polygenesis, that these common things that we share could have originated in other places independent of one another,
Mm.
but that the commonality isn't like geographic location or a place in time, but just the human psyche and the human
Yeah.
experience. And
Yeah.
like of course there's common problems, so there's going to be common solutions, and so there could be this polygenetic explanation as to why you have something. So you might go into it like a Nibley and go, because this is similar to this thing, it's connected. Well, maybe the only connection is the human psyche
Yeah.
and not any other kind of, anyway.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
yeah.
So for the longest time, I looked at it as all of these things that I was finding out and learning through Nibley
Yeah.
and studying the temple. I thought it was all evidence and proof for the truthfulness of the LDS Church.
Yeah.
And later on, I came to a pretty different understanding of why we see all those similarities, and it's probably a mix of the monogenesis and polygenesis that you
Oh,
talked about,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
how we're all part of a single reality. We're all members of kind of this human condition and the human psyche, and so there are archetypes that are embedded in our nature that can come out in all of these different places and different cultures and times throughout history. Uh,
Can you give an example of an archetype?
um,
What are some of these archetypes?
yeah, so for example, resurrection
Mm,
is uh, an archetype that exists in so many different cultures. Long predating Christianity, uh, the idea of rebirth, uh,
hmm
of the divinity coming back to life. That has been around in so many different cultures and different societies and spiritual traditions, really as far back as we can go in history. And so that's just one example of something that seems to be embedded somehow in our nature. There's something deep in the human psyche that has this intuition of of the divine being reborn in the world, and
mm,
it's cyclical. It happens over and over and over, and you could call it reincarnation, you can call it resurrection, you can call it rebirth. There's so many different
yeah.
terms that different cultures have given to it. Um, but they're all a very similar intuition of the divine coming back to life repeatedly.
Yeah.
So that's one example.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and before you move on from that, I just want, I think there could be a lot of explanations as to why there's that archetype that seems to be intuitively there. I mean, have you come across any explanations as to why that exists that are really satisfying to you?
yeah, yeah, I've definitely reinterpreted the resurrection story. The way that I used to think of it was very literal in
Sure.
terms of, Jesus died, he was in the tomb for 3 days, and then he came back to life. Jesus, the person, was made to be a living human being once again. And I took it all very literally and historically, that was what resurrection was about. And
Mm,
when we are resurrected, it will be because after we die, uh, something will happen that will bring our bodies back together, and we will be the same people that we think we are today once again.
Hmm.
But I now see it in a very different light. I see it much more um, in the sense of there is this cosmos, there's this universe that has generated beings like us, uh, living things, and we tend to think that we are our own independent selves, our own independent beings apart from nature, but really we are nature happening. We are
Sure.
that cosmos that is uh, being formed into living forms, living beings. We are the incarnate form of the cosmos itself. And and so in my mind, resurrection has taken on this uh, this this symbolism of the cosmos itself becoming incarnate in living things,
Sure.
all
Yeah.
living things, whether human or animal or plant life
Right.
or even non-living things, all material things, all physicality, all objects in the entire universe have have had uh, have been constituted from something deeper. They've taken on form, and in some cases, such as ours, they've also taken on life. And so, really,
Yeah.
it's that idea of a transcendent being that has become all form, and including living things, and it continually takes on new forms. When in Eastern traditions, they say that there's nothing that is permanent. It's all
Right.
impermanent. Everything is
Yeah.
changing. Everything is undergoing a process, and it's living and it's dying. But then things are formed again. The new forms take shape. New organisms are born, and this is a continual process, continual cycle that goes around and around.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that I now view resurrection. There's subtleties and different ways that you can interpret um, uh, resurrection, but that's one of the primary ways that I now view it, is as kind of the universal is becoming incarnate in finite forms continually.
Yeah, the infinite becoming finite, then
Yeah,
becoming infinite again, then becoming finite. And
yeah,
I think when I'm trying to imagine why there would be an archetype like that that's embedded in the human psyche and is kind of common across, space and time, that from the earliest days of man being able to observe the seasons and see, okay, there's winter, spring, summer, fall. We get,
yeah,
you see this cycle going on
yeah,
all around you of death and rebirth, and this, like a sense of your own mortality, this fear of, like, oh wait, so someday I'm going to die. What the heck is that going to be about?
yeah,
And so you
yeah,
there's this fear, and then there's also this observation that life continues to go on. And I really like the way that you said it. We are uh we are that,
yeah,
we grow out of this world just the way that a tree has grown out of this world, and
exactly.
we seed and fruit and reproduce just the way other forms of life
Yeah,
uh do this. And so I guess when you get so attached to your own individual personality, like a single blossom on a tree,
mhm,
you're like, is that blossom going to come back? Is that exact blossom going to come back? No, but next year there's going to be a blossom in that spot on the
yeah,
tree again. It might not be exactly the same.
yeah.
Um,
And this is where it starts to get more into the mysticism of it,
yeah,
because what we think of as ourself
yeah,
is as this personality, this
right,
person that I have become in the world, which is kind of this. It's a construction of so many different ideas and memories and experiences, and we develop this sense of self. But if we strip all of that away, what are we? Where did we come from? Where did we take our form from. And I think if we dig down deep into that, we find that we are like that blossom coming out of the tree. We are this living thing that has emerged from the earth, and we are a part of that earth. Which is interesting if you look at the Hebrew origin of the name Adam. Comes from the Hebrew Adamah, which actually means ground or earth.
Does it mean red clay?
Well, yeah, and in a sense, it's even the word human with that HUM beginning, it denotes humus or soil. It's all pointing back to the ground. We have come out of the ground. Genesis says that you are from the dust of the earth, and unto the dust you will return. And so yeah, our sense of self is a big part of the mystical point of view, and it is seen as something that is veiling our deeper self, the deeper part of our nature that is one with the earth, or one with nature, one with the cosmos. And so when you start looking in that light, then every living thing that comes into being, that comes into life, it's not a person that's coming to life. It's that universal principle, or the universal nature that is sprouting out from its own self. It's the deeper, whatever word you want to call it, divine or God or cosmos or nature, that is growing out of itself. It is developing, it is unfolding.
Yeah.
And that is what is being incarnate in all forms in the universe.
Yeah, I want to come back to this idea of self, and but before we get too far down the mystical rabbit hole, I want to hear the end of your own metamorphosis story of how you went from being this very conservative, devout, curious TBM to like, wait a minute, I'm going from a literal interpretation of these things to a metaphorical, mystical interpretation of these things, and I definitely do want to get back to the self, because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, so after I got back from my mission, I really started reading Nibley a lot more and got really interested in the temple, as I was saying. And so I started a website that's still online. It's called templestudy.com. And for about 6 or 7 years, I studied and wrote about the temple. I wrote about all those things that we were talking about, all those parallels, those interesting correspondences between the LDS temple tradition and other ancient spiritual traditions and
or quasi-ancient.
Yeah.
like the Masonic stuff, which
exactly.
Maybe it goes back ancient, maybe it doesn't, but
yeah, some things were more ancient than others.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was writing about all of these things, and I thought it was all evidence for the truthfulness of the LDS Church. But I guess it was around 2012 or so that I started studying evolution in depth. I got a bunch of books, most of them actually from LDS authors, incidentally. And I just really wanted to understand, okay, what is evolution? What does it mean for humanity? Because I had grown up with a very conservative, young Earth creationist type of viewpoint that believed that Adam and Eve were literally the first humans on Earth, and
the first time that death was ever introduced into the Earth was from the fall.
Right, exactly. And so I had a very literal view, and so I wanted to know what this evolution thing was all about. And the deeper I dug into evolution, the more I realized that this really is a real thing, that all the life on Earth has really evolved from more primitive forms over billions of years. Um, and as I pondered that and thought through it more and more, the more I could not take the religious stories literally anymore. I couldn't reconcile what I was learning about biological evolution and the literal interpretation of all the religious stories that I had been told my whole life.
Right.
Uh, and so gradually, you could say my shelf broke. um, I couldn't reconcile it anymore. The literal point of view of all the religious stories didn't make sense to me anymore, and I couldn't be authentic with myself if I continued believing in it that way. And so, over time, that really worked on me until it was about 2016 or so. Both my wife and myself decided to leave the LDS Church. Um, we just didn't feel like it was resonating with what we were learning and feeling and believing.
And it was mainly due to evolution.
For me, it was. There was some other more minor things that were upsetting, and for my wife, it was other things that didn't resonate with her.
Mm-hmm.
But we kind of both came to this conclusion at the same time that it wasn't working for us. What we were doing in the LDS Church, it just wasn't resonating anymore. Um,
But before you made that decision to leave, did you get excited about evolution? Did you ever see like um or construct ways that evolution could fit into the gospel, even though you're seeing, okay, we can't literally accept the Garden of Eden story anymore because I can't believe that Adam and Eve were the first humans created,
yeah,
or that these animals were just like boom, sculpted out of clay
yeah,
by the great God sculptor of the universe. It happened in a different way. So did you find a way to reconcile those things? Did you ever try to engage with other members of your ward, and especially around the idea of eternal progression? Because when I started learning about evolution, I saw these correlates to spiritual development, and especially what Joseph Smith talked about, intelligences, and how Elohim had been in the beginning, whatever, there was just the sea of intelligent energy, and there was one that was more intelligent than the rest, and
yeah,
recognized that it was, and like came to this awareness of itself, and then had this mission to bring the other intelligences to an awareness of themselves, from the King
yeah,
Follett discourse. I'm like, holy cow, that could fit in with this idea of evolution to me at the time, even as I was still a believer.
yeah,
But people weren't as excited about those things as I was when I would talk about them in gospel doctrine class, and so
yeah,
eventually I was shown the door.
yeah, yeah. That idea of kind of eternal progression, that definitely rung a bell with evolution. The idea of evolution, that things
Yeah,
are always progressing, right?
right.
And so, yeah, I kind of looked at
Like the line upon line, precept upon
yeah.
precept, mutation upon mutation.
Exactly. Yeah. And I went back to my fallback, Nibley, and tried to see what he had said about the subject. And he at one time wrote an essay, Before Adam,
Mm,
where he talked about, well, there were human-like beings before Adam and Eve. That seems pretty clear. And the way that he looked at it was that God started this whole drama of modern humans with two of them. Like it's like God came down and chose two of the humanoids that were here on Earth.
That were just at, you know, like ignorant beasts of the field kind of thing, and
Yeah,
then like put their intelligence into them, and here's your divine spirit that separates you from the
yeah,
other Cro-Magnon
exactly.
cavemen.
It
Yeah.
seems like he believed that God just picked two at random
Mm,
from the humans or human-like ancestors that we have to become or be the Adam and Eve of the Genesis story, and
mm-hmm,
that God made a Garden of Eden, and he put these two humans into that garden, and that kind of began the whole drama of Genesis, and everything unfolded from there. And so
mm-hmm.
for a long time, that's the kind of way I looked at it, and the way that
Yeah.
I reconciled it um, with the teachings of the church, or tried to at least for a
Mm-hmm.
time. But even that eventually didn't make sense to me anymore. It didn't make sense to me why God would select just two of these humans, and there must have been at least hundreds of thousands of them at that time, if you're talking literally, 6,000 years ago. um,
6,000 years ago.
um, it didn't make sense to me that God would select only two of them in order to become covenant beings with God, and to start the whole drama of humanity, and to exclude the rest that had to have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of other human beings on Earth. That just fell apart for me. It didn't make any sense to me anymore that God would do that. That God would be so selective, uh, and 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 of course that whole idea of death being introduced by the fall, that didn't seem to jive with the idea that life has been dying for millions of
Yeah.
years, even before.
Yeah, you can't have evolution with that. You couldn't have had those two
Yeah,
that God picked out of the hundreds of thousands without like
exactly.
a whole bunch of death
Yeah.
before.
So I reconciled it for a time, trying to use some of those ways, but eventually those fell through as well,
Hmm.
and I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't believe in those ways of reconciling it, and I had to find a different way of belief. Um,
Do you think, and I'm curious, like how much of this is social pressure because the beliefs don't fit together anymore, and so the main group says I'm going to push out the beliefs that are not similar. How much of that was like a social reaction? How much was just like your own personal? I don't really fit here anymore. I'm sure it was a blend of the two.
yeah,
But if
it was a blend for sure. I even wrote about it occasionally on Temple Study about evolution and the ways that I was reconciling it with myself, and I was having some discussions with others about how they were going about reconciling it. And um, but it was really hammering me internally, trying to make it all work out. Um, and eventually, I couldn't do it. I couldn't. The ways that the church was teaching were the nature of Adam and Eve, that these were literal individuals, two human individuals that had the whole human drama had begun with in a literal Garden of Eden.
yeah,
It just eventually I had to let that go.
yeah,
I had to go beyond it. I had to detach myself from it,
from the literalness of it.
from the literal interpretation of it.
Yeah.
Um, I just couldn't see myself going down that road any further and being a genuine human being that believed in what I believed in.
Mm.
And so, eventually, me and my wife, we decided to leave the church, and that was one of the hardest things that I for my wife as well. It was incredibly difficult. It was not an easy thing to leave the church. It was our entire worldview up until that time. We had both been born into it. And so it was devastating to have to leave that behind. It was just soul crushing. Um, and it plunged me into a kind of depression for at least a couple years or so. I was really struggling to try to rebuild some sense of the world and my place in it. Um, and one of the first places I went was somehow I came across this idea of meditation. I think it was the first book I read on it was a book called Mindfulness in Plain English, and I can't even pronounce the author's name. It's like Gurantara, but it's
You did it.
it's a
You pronounced it.
it's a classic book about what is meditation and how to do it.
Yeah.
And I read that, and it really made an impact on me. And I decided I'm going to try this. This sounds like a pretty traditional spiritual practice that might do me some good. And so I started, just meditating for maybe 5 or 10 minutes a day, and I almost immediately started noticing a difference in my life. My mind started quieting down a little bit more, and I started seeing things internally that that I had been blind to, that I hadn't recognized before. And so this spiritual practice, it really started to open my eyes to the deeper nature of spirituality and religion in general. I started reading some other books that also talked about meditation, like 10% Happier by Dan Harris, and Waking Up by Sam Harris. Even though he's pretty negative about religion in general, he's very much an enthusiast about spiritual practice and meditation specifically, as a way of getting much more in touch with our deepest being, our deepest internal nature and consciousness itself. And so that led me even further into spiritual practice and developing my meditation practice.
Now, were you doing the meditation before you left, or you found this after you left Mormonism?
I had started just before we left, just a few months before we left.
So meditation was a tool that the devil used to help you out of the truth.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure about that.
Yeah, it started opening my eyes up to the deeper nature of what spirit is. I had always thought very intellectually about spirituality and religion. It was very much a very conceptual game for me. Trying to work things out intellectually, but I hadn't really made it an internal thing. I hadn't really made that internal connection to spirit. I had occasionally felt the spirit on my mission, and I had spiritual experiences that I felt really joyful and that kind of thing. But I didn't know why. I hadn't made any kind of really deep spiritual connection within myself. But beginning a meditation practice and making it a serious daily thing, that I feel really started getting me in touch with what is this thing that we call spirit. What does that mean? And what does it mean to have a spiritual practice. Um,
I think right now is a good time to ask you. I'm going to ask you two questions, and I'd like you to answer them in the order that they're given.
okay.
The first question for you, Bryce, is what is your position on woo? Woo woo. Okay. Because we talked about that a little bit the other day. Define it, talk about what it is. How do you feel about it? And then the second thing, what is spirit or spirituality? Then I'd
Yeah.
like you to define that. But let's start with the woo and then go to the spirituality.
Yeah. So the way that I would see woo is in connection to a lot of modern New Age perspectives that seem to be wholly ungrounded or completely untethered from any kind of rational basis whatsoever or scientific grounding. Um, things that,
Can you give any examples of
well,
woo?
for example, the idea that crystals have some kind of magical properties that heal us. This seems to me to be a kind of woo because there have been no studies that show that crystals inherently have any kind of magical vibration or frequency type of property that would have any effect on the human being. Um, and so this new age idea of crystals having healing properties uh, starts to verge on that woo factor. It goes beyond anything that we have any kind of rational basis for believing to be true or real in reality. Um, so that's one example, and there's many that have popped up in New Age circles
Mm-hmm.
that seem to just be wholly untethered from any uh, grounding in reality, any kind of evidence whatsoever for them.
Yeah.
Um,
So what and so what is your reaction or your response when you come across something that you see, oh, this is woo, this is untethered from rational thinking or from any
yeah,
kind of scientific.
yeah. So the way that I usually see those things now is, I think there is a reason for them. There's a reason why they have emerged in kind of our collective consciousness in humanity, and why they've cropped up in these New Age circles. But I don't think
So when you say there's a reason for them, like there's a value in.
there's a reason that they have come to be
Yeah.
in these New Age circles. But I think we don't know what that reason is. Uh, uh,
But you didn't like the word that I gave you, value.
I do think that there could be value to it as well. Um,
Well,
uh,
this is the premise behind folklore. You know that traditions that don't provide any value die off.
yeah,
Traditions that do have a value, even if that value changes, even if the way that the tradition functions changes, as long as there's a value to it,
yeah,
it's kept alive, it's maintained. So if there's something like crystals or these kind of woo things where you're saying there's a reason for it, I go straight to like, what is the value, what is the
yeah,
function? And it doesn't have to necessarily be the same function or the same value for everybody who's uh, keeping it alive, but there has to be some kind of an explanation, some kind of a reason, some kind of value for it to stay alive.
but yeah, value. I do think there is value in some sense in a lot of the woo. Um,
Even if the value is only creating a sense of community.
yeah,
So you've got a group of people who are they come together over similar beliefs, whether those beliefs are grounded in rationality or science or not. If it brings these people together, and you can have a really fulfilling life around very unscientific
yeah.
ideas.
And you said something about belief. Our beliefs are very powerful,
Yeah,
as the placebo effect has shown.
yeah,
What we believe works has a tremendous impact on our way of being in the world and in our
yeah.
communities. And so even that belief function alone might serve a valid purpose or value in the community, even if it's something that's, completely disconnected from any kind of scientific um, rationality. If we believe it to be true, if we believe that it has a value and an effect on us and our community, then that belief alone can serve a purpose.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't think that there are the ways in which we think these things are working. I don't think that we've really pinned that down.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and a lot of the
But so the point I wanted to bring out here was that when you're exploring ideas of spirituality, you're also very cautious of woo,
yeah
and you want to stay very, very clear of woo, and try to stick to those things that have a rational basis, some kind of scientific evidence. There have been studies,
yeah
um, peer-reviewed things that other people are seeing similar patterns,
yeah
and you lean more towards that. And if you see something that's this unfounded
yeah.
claim, you're like,
It's
eh.
really easy to go out into the weeds of things when
Mm,
you're talking about mysticism, especially.
yeah,
Um, you can really get far out there in things that just you can start believing in things that just have no rational basis in reality. And I try to stay clear of those things. I try to base my beliefs in some kind of rationality or in my own personal experience as well, because there is a lot of uh, mysticism that takes you beyond rationality, and that's where you can start to get into trouble if you're not careful.
yeah, yeah. All right. So let's go to spirit. What is spirit, or spirit? Like, what is spirit?
Yeah, the way that I see spirit now, um, which is quite different than when I was in the church. I see spirit now as something very closely related, if not the same as consciousness.
Hmm.
Um, it is that which makes us aware beings or alive beings. It's You could call it, the life force or the life energy or the the awareness that has come into being in living things. Um, it's that breath of life that the divine has caused to emerge here in you and me and all living things. We all have some kind of of awareness, of consciousness, of knowing, or of interacting with our environment, of being aware. Um, and this is what I refer to as spirit.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to double click on this one a little bit, because that's it's a little bit different from what I view as spirit, and I hadn't thought about these differences before. It's interesting. So when I think about spirit now, I think about energy, and you did say life energy, but for
Yeah,
you it was mainly awareness, consciousness, that part of it. So I think about like atomic energy or subatomic energy, that would even be, so I could say that the desk that I'm sitting at, I don't know if it has consciousness or not. There's not any, like, if we're starting to say that this desk has consciousness, we're starting to get into that woo
that's right.
here, because there's no indication that this desk can experience anything as a desk.
Right.
If the When you get down into like the actual molecules and the atoms, maybe they're interacting with the environment around them, so there's some form of awareness or consciousness there, but it's definitely an energy,
Yeah.
like like electricity, a spark. I don't know what you would say other than energy, but to me that's what spirit has come to mean. And spiritual, um, living a spiritual life is, for me, is kind of like a recognition of the oneness of it, like that energy,
Hmm.
whether we're talking about this desk and whether we're talking about a consciousness that's some form of consciousness or the kind of consciousness that I experience, there's still that connection there. And so there's
Yeah.
still some respect that should be paid or
Yeah.
could be paid, or, you know,
Yeah.
like it would make life a more um, fulfilling experience to see those commonalities and things that come at that level of spirit or energy.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest difference between the way that you and I see it right now is this idea of consciousness.
Yeah. And I think I could see it through your lens as well, that, if you dig deeper behind, what is consciousness, it seems like it does cross over into some kind of energy factor. Um, you know, in all that we have studied about the nature of the universe, it seems to all go back to some kind of energy form. Um, and even all matter seems to come originally from energy that has been fused together.
Yeah,
Um,
there's really, I mean, it's almost kind of silly to me now to think that there's something separate,
yeah,
that there's like matter and then there's energy. I mean,
yeah,
because it's like you can't have matter without energy. And so
exactly.
could you have energy without matter? I don't know if they're really separate
Yeah.
things.
And we know now through Einstein that really energy and mass are kind of two sides of the same coin.
Mm,
These are basically, we're looking at the same thing in two different ways.
mm,
Um, uh, Whether you call it energy or matter that has mass, we're looking at the same stuff,
yeah.
whatever we want to call that. Uh, and it's that stuff that seems to have given birth to the living beings that we know of today as ourself and all of life. So that's where
Yeah.
I start bringing.
And desks.
Say again, desks. Yeah,
And desks.
desks. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that deeper energy of spirit seems to have become incarnate in all forms, including things like desks and living beings like you and me.
Yeah.
And so that's how I see the spirit now.
So I want to have multiple talks with you, Bryce. So I don't want to take do it all right now. But while we're talking about spirit, this idea of intelligence, and again, I referenced the King Follett discourse earlier because I've always been fascinated with this idea of intelligence that's in the book. What is this? The Doctrine and Covenants, and that in first there was intelligence, which was unorganized intelligence, and then it was organized into spirit, like beings or whatever, and then you have incarnation in the flesh kind of thing. That's the progression, right? That the Doctrine and Covenants has. But when I think about intelligence, I've been thinking about the intelligence at a we know that in our bodies we have DNA,
Mhm.
and that the DNA is this intelligence that has been passed along through the process of evolution. Yes, there's mutations that happen, but mostly it's like, if there's this, then this is going to, genetically express itself as a positive trait. What is it? It's like, oh, I'm getting into my genetics here and I'm getting all messed up. Like if something is either a recessive or a dominant,
Uh-huh.
is that what it is?
Uh-huh.
But that's all intelligence,
Yeah.
and it's stored in our bodies as, it's energy that makes up the DNA. Like, what is it? Proteins,
Uh-huh.
um,
Amino acids.
amino acids. Um, but there's got to be something that is like the DNA behind the DNA that tells even the DNA what to do. So like the DNA for a human is going to be different from a DNA from a frog or a
Yeah.
DNA from a tree, because we've evolved through different paths.
Yeah.
But there's got to be something, like I don't, and I'm exposing my own ignorance here. What makes a helium atom separate from a hydrogen atom, separate from a, those are also responses to the environment, that if something is a certain way, then we're going to have this kind of a bond and become this kind of a thing. That I would imagine there must be some kind of intelligence even behind that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that kind of intelligence, and does that put us into the woo?
Well, the way that I see it is that this whole universe seems to have a progression, from simpler forms to more complex forms. We seem to clearly see that progression, from a very simple, uniform early universe to what we have today, which is just an incredible diversity of forms and beings, and so I see there's an evolution going on of intelligence, including this thing that we were talking about earlier, spirit or energy, becoming aware of itself, and that's where I return to consciousness. This seems to be very closely related to what we think of as intelligence, and probably what Joseph Smith thought of as intelligence. It was this awareness factor that arises in living things, that they can become self-reflective, aware of themselves. It's almost as if that spirit energy of the universe, in becoming more complex and evolving, is beginning to become aware of itself. It's waking up to its own nature, through the conduit of consciousness.
So as I'm listening to you say this, I'm thinking about like what are the biological mechanisms for awareness, and we're talking about sensory perception, right? And again, the way that evolution has worked on our eyes to be able to register a certain spectrum of light, with our ears to register a certain spectrum of sound, which is just a disruption of molecules in the air. So like as the organism that eventually became I'm thinking back to the nibbly pre-atomites kind of thing. Anyway, I'm just making a joke in my mind, sorry. As we evolved our ability to sense, and our brain to make sense of what we're sensing and to tell a story, it seems like that's what has evolved into this thing that people call the ego, or the part of our consciousness that is aware of the world around us, as fed to us through our five main senses, which there's not really just five, but that's what we've been taught. And so that's what would you agree, that's what people refer to as the ego?
Yes. I think that, evolution has created these living beings that have developed this ability to sense their environment. And if we look at it all as this spirit energy that is complexifying itself through evolution, then it's developing these senses, these bodily senses, that register through consciousness as a kind of way of knowing itself. But this is
what does that mean, knowing, though? Is the knowing, is it just like a sensory response? Like it's the photon hitting the membrane of the eye and going, okay, there's an impact, it's sending an electronic signal to the brain. Like at what point does knowing happen? Is it the point of impact? Is it the point of recognition in the brain when there's a story that's told about what that actually is or what it means? Like, oh, there's danger coming because or the sound that we hear that we associate with harm or safety, or all these Pavlovian things. Like at what point does the knowing actually happen in the consciousness and awareness?
We seem to know a lot about kind of the causal pathway from our senses all the way into our brain. where it really gets mysterious is how do you get from a firing neuron, the action potential that goes down the dendrite of a neuron, how does that turn into experience?
Right.
How does that turn into a perception? And that's what's known as the hard problem of consciousness that no one's been able to solve. How do you get from something physical to something mental? It's the mind-body problem that philosophers have been wrestling with for ages. And what I suggest is that what's going on in our brains is kind of the external or outward side of reality. And what we experience inwardly in our consciousness is the internal or inward side of reality. It's not that the brain neurons and their firing mechanisms, that those are generating or causing our internal perceptions. It's rather we're looking at the same thing from two different sides. The neuron is what it looks like on the outside, and our perceptions or our knowing in consciousness is what it feels like or what it is experienced on the inside. And so that's where the knowing
the inside and outside of what?
Well, that's the mysterious thing is what is that deeper thing that gives rise to the two different sides. And that's where we're starting to get much closer to that thing that we call the spirit or the divine or the one or God or whatever. There's so many different names that people have given it. Ultimate reality. There's so many different terms that we can give to it, but really it's a very mysterious thing. What is that ultimate thing that is giving rise to both the physical and spiritual or mental sides of reality? And that's where I think we start to get into what is the nature of spirit and what are we ultimately in our deepest nature.
Mm-hmm. All right, I need to take a breath. And now for your moment of Zen.
Sometime when I came across a sign saying, "Who are you and where are you from? We don't like visitors come. Who knows that man first said, who can read? Who knows that yeah, my ass wiggle low me."
I love thinking about this kind of stuff, and it just it gets like this inward spiral of I don't know. When we talked the other day, you were talking about the monkey brain, and all of the different voices and chatter and those things that you're actually able to silence through a practice of meditation. And when I engage in really fascinating subjects like this, that monkey brain of mine starts going. The hamster jumps on the wheel to switch metaphors and starts running around like crazy.
Our intellect, we're always trying to figure out, what are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? Who are we? What we seem to have, woken up one day when we were young and going, where did I come from? I must have come from somewhere. I didn't just pop into existence from nowhere. And this gets us going down that road of thinking of, who am I really? What's the nature of my deepest being? What is my nature in nature? And that's what starts to get us into the mystical and what is the nature of reality that we find ourselves in today? And are we something separate from it, or are we a manifestation of it?
We are it,
an expression of nature itself, and we only think we're something separate from it in our minds because of the way that our intellects work, the way that we have this kind of this duality of subject object. in order for us to perceive our perceptions or to know any kind of thought. But when we start digging down deeper through spiritual practices like meditation or other means, we can almost penetrate through that intellect, that duality of intellect, to something deeper that does seem to show our oneness with all of reality, with all of nature, that we're not actually something separate from it. We are it that is manifesting itself today in the here and now. And that's where mysticism really takes us to, is that direct intuitive perception of our oneness with all of being, with all of nature, with all of cosmos, with each other. And that's where I think, the origin of all religious traditions comes from, is that mystical intuition or contemplation of the oneness of all of reality.
When you were ordained to the priesthood, did you get one of those charts that showed like whoever ordained you, who ordained them, and who ordained them, like all the way back to Joseph Smith, and then Peter, James, and John, and Jesus?
I did, yeah.
It'd be really interesting if you could come up with some kind of chain of process visual that starts with you and works all the way back, every single domino thing that had to happen to be you, all the way back to the Big Bang.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there is a continuous chain.
Yeah.
just like there is in the imaginary priesthood graph. There is this very real chain of events that happened that started with the Big Bang. And right now, all of that stuff that started back then, this chain of events, is manifested in you right now. Those are the kinds of things in mysticism that really expand my way of looking at things, that I get really interested in.
Yeah.
And I want to wrap it up for today here, just in a couple of minutes. Do you consider yourself a mystic, or are you just like a researcher of mysticism? Like, how do you identify yourself, Bryce?
I would definitely say that I'm a mystic. I'm a seeker. I'm a contemplative. That's another word that is often thrown around for this kind of perception. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
But yeah, I am one that not only studies genuine mystical concepts and ideas and theologies and psychology, but I also try to practice it as well. I try to put it into practice. I have a contemplative practice of meditation that I do daily. And so I'm not only kind of a third person looking at it from the outside, but I also try to put myself into it itself to know it directly in my own experience. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, that's...
So that idea of direct experience with the divine, or with life, with nature, with spirit, with energy.
Yeah.
I mean, under that definition, I would think every single person is having direct experience. They are direct experience with this, whether they're aware of it or thinking about it or not.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
And then that's one of the most remarkable or shocking things that happens in the mystical experience, in the mystical awakening or realization, is that we are all part of something, a oneness, even if we don't know it, even if it is veiled from our awareness. And for most people, it is veiled. We have become blind to it. We are unaware of who we are
or uninterested. I mean, a lot of people are just uninterested in it.
Yeah. And so this connection to spirit is something that we all possess, even those that are unaware of it or don't care to be aware of it. It is something that seems to exist in kind of the the ground of being itself, which we all
Yeah.
are participants in. It's something that is in each and every one of us, even if we are not aware of it.
Yeah.
And that's part of the mystical realization, is that we're all members of this one body, whether you call it the body of Christ, or the
Yeah.
Brahman, or the universe, or nature.
Right.
That is part of that realization.
And I'm curious how becoming a mystic, as you have in these recent years, has changed or impacted or influenced the way that you view Mormonism.
Yeah.
And because even as you were talking about the oneness, I'm thinking about the idea of Zion. And you've got so many of these ideas that are baked into not just Mormonism, but many religions. And I think maybe next time we could spend some more time going into this impact on the way that you view Mormonism. But maybe just quickly,
Yeah.
how has it changed that for you?
Well, one of the most amazing things that came out of my own spiritual practice of meditation was this deep realization that all of the world's major religions or spiritual traditions, they have all come out of this deepest mystical realization of oneness. They all seem to be different expressions of that ultimate reality. They're
Mm-hmm.
different lenses, almost like you take a prism and you shine white light through it and you get a million different colors out the other side.
Yeah.
Those million different colors are kind of all the different religious traditions that we have today in the world.
Yeah.
They're all interpretations or translations of that original mystical insight of oneness.
Yeah.
And I see Mormonism in that light, that it is one of these expressions of the ultimate reality as it was interpreted and translated through the mind of Joseph Smith. I think he actually did have real direct encounters with the divine, mystical encounters, visionary experiences. And then his mind went to work on it, interpreting it in the symbols and the terms and the language and his surrounding religious culture. He viewed it through that lens, and so I see Mormonism as one of the expressions of the ultimate reality.
Yeah.
And I see in it very deep truth that I couldn't see in it, ironically enough, when I was in
Yeah.
the church. I was blind to it. It was only after,
Because of the literal way of interpreting the stories and
yeah, the
stuff.
literal way, that completely fell apart. But after
Yeah.
I started having these deeper mystical intuitions and contemplation, I began
I
to see it in myself directly,
yeah.
in my own experience.
I really loved your crystal metaphor, shining the light through the crystal, and you get these millions of different colors.
Yeah.
Mainly because you use crystals as an example of when you get into the woo.
Yeah.
That was kind of fun. But just as like if you've got this singular thing, whether you call it God or nature or source energy or like whatever you call it, and you shine it through this thing that's got all these crystals or apertures or whatever, and it splits off into a million different things. I think that's kind of what each person is. Each expression of life
Yeah.
is like that too.
Yeah.
And so like you wouldn't look at that million shades of rainbow and go, okay, reds are good, yellows are bad, greens are they just screw everybody up,
Right.
so we got to get rid of them.
Right.
Like it's all part of the one, the same
Yeah.
thing. And so for me, I never really wanted to be all that angry at Mormonism anyway. And I think the way that I came out of my literal beliefs, studying folklore for as long as I did, it was a real gradual burn for me. And I didn't really go through a lot of the anger
Yeah.
where I felt like I was lied to, like a lot of people do, because these are just traditions that we've learned. I understand it's this is what happens.
Yeah.
I for me, taking a more mystical interpretation of Mormonism allows me to not get so upset
Yeah.
and be more accepting. I think be more loving, because that's where I want to be. I don't
Yeah.
if I could think of what, if there is a single source energy, God, way of viewing the world or looking at the world, like I don't know if there is or not. You know, like you would say, well, you're making Jesus unhappy. You know, you heard that, or like you made the devil happy. You made Jesus cry. You know, things like that. I don't know if there's like a single personality that you could say this is what God thinks or views. But if there was, I can only use my imagination. If there was, it would have to be, it loves everything.
Yeah.
It appreciates, it finds joy in everything. It doesn't really judge everything. It doesn't go, okay, the yellows are bad and the greens are good, or anything like that. It's all part of this, different expressions of this one thing.
Yeah.
And even if that's just a metaphor, to be able to, in times where I'm being like super critical of myself because I did something that I shouldn't have done or whatever, I've got these cognitive distortions that, you know, I'm discounting the positive of what happens in my life, or I'm catastrophizing, I'm trapped in anxiety, I'm worried. Having this uh, worldview has helped me find more peace and calm, and especially around the Mormon
Yeah.
stuff that is so deeply ingrained in me. And
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
anyway, so is that similar for you, Bryce?
It has definitely brought a peace into my life that I did not know before, um, and a very a deep peace,
Yeah.
knowing that we are all in this together in one way or another. We're all going along this path of life together, and the ways that we view the ultimate, I don't think are at bottom contradictory. They're complementary. They're different expressions of that ultimate oneness, that ultimate love that I think is the ground of reality itself.
Hmm.
And knowing that, experiencing that directly in myself has really brought a lot of peace into my life as well.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So just to wrap up for today, if people want to find you, Bryce, where can they find you? And if they want to have a one-on-one discussion with you about any of the things that came up or anything else, where could they find you and have that discussion?
Yeah, so my current website is thymindoman.com. And that's where I have been writing a lot of content for the last couple years about the mystical point of view and its relationship to Mormonism and Christianity more generally, and even beyond that to all the different major religious traditions. That's where I do a lot of writing, have a topical guide there to help people get into different subjects that I've written about. And I also have that friendship room where I'm able to, if people want to meet with me to talk about different things, I'm open to that, and they can schedule a time there to meet with me online in the friend.
How long do you usually schedule those for? It's like 30 minutes.
Yeah, I can go for 30 minutes or an hour or even longer if need
Hmm.
be. If people just want to talk about these kinds of things, I'm open to doing that. And there's no fee or anything to do that. I have come around to a gift economy in the way that I do things. I want to give my gifts away as much as I possibly can, because I feel like I've been giving something. I've been given something
Yeah.
tremendously important and valuable that I want to help give away as much as I possibly can to others. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. Did you come up with the gift economy, or is that something that you saw
that
somewhere
that
else?
is something that has become more popular, particularly in kind of the contemplative circles that I
Mm,
I have become acquainted with. It's a way of giving one's gifts away to the world and relying on the generosity and goodwill of others to give in return. So it's kind of a reciprocal giving situation rather than, the capitalists' market economy that we're so familiar with today.
Yeah.
To have a much more heart in it and is much more in line with connecting people and establishing those deeper social bonds than we typically find in our market economy.
Yeah. I like that. Gift economy.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Bryce, for coming on. So if anybody has any questions for Bryce, or I plan to have other conversations with Bryce where we go more into this idea of self and consciousness and some other things that we scratched the surface on today. Joseph Smith, there's a lot of directions we can go with this. So if there's any questions, things that people want to hear us talk about, you can send an email to infantsonthrones@gmail.com. I'll get that. And you know how to contact Bryce. I'll put his contact information on the website as well. Any final words, Bryce?
No, I think we've covered a lot here. I look forward to further conversations.
Yeah, me too. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Sam from Wilmer, Minnesota. On weekdays, I prosecute criminals for crimes like domestic abuse, production of methamphetamine, and sexual assault. On Sundays, I learn about the things that are truly evil in this world, like gay people getting married, consumption of coffee, and bare shoulders. You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com. And if you really like what you hear, you can give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes. I did. Anyone for the closing prayer?
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.